Jason's killing it.
Yeah, nice.
Revenue per lead over $13,000.
Okay. This weekend, by the way, we may get a fix out for where the arrow is on the line. I don't know if we quite decided where the red, yellow, green is, but at least where the arrow is will get fixed.
Okay. I think the red, yellow, green, we should assume a fairly even distribution. I would
Just
imagine
the
if
third,
we're
right?
able to look at a bell curve that the 90th percentile would include a lot of houses on either side, and the outliers are cut out.
Yeah.
So that should just be third, third, third thinking.
Yep.
Visually, it's going to represent to non-mathematic people best that way.
Right. I don't know if we quite decided on where the colors are though. If they're just um, right, because the whole spectrum is green to red. There's the gray arrow, and it's the gray arrow that we want to then also indicate green,
I'd
yellow,
like the
red.
gray arrow to stay, so the red, yellow, green could be above it, because they
Okay.
may want to. We may end up deciding that gets represented with and without the red, yellow, green, so
Okay.
that people
So
can
that's
understand.
above it, the red, yellow, green. And actually, we could probably leave the arrow exactly where it is. It's always on top, and the black would show up over green, yellow, red anyway. So it might be on top of that. It might be off to the side of it. But okay. All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a
That won't be
homeowner,
available for this weekend, but that should be a relatively simple addition. One thing I did want to mention that I had to go over with Kaloy, but I probably should have mentioned to you as well is, let's see if I can open the file just to have a nice. I had to create a spreadsheet to show it to him, but hang on, let me share this. What is this called? Slopes. 1 second. Slopes. All right. I guess what I wanted to say is we talked about before that when you pick a min and a max, and his example was 34 and 54,000. Remember, he had 44,000 in the middle, the example from Jason, that when you pick that, you have defined the slope of the entire line. The problem is that there's not enough room, right? For example, if you define 34 to 54 as the min and max, that means right the middle is 44. That means the bottom is 24 and the top is 64. Well, the bottom is 24. That doesn't work if they actually have existing of 12, right? Um, so we have to, what we had to do was say, when you've defined the gray part of the line, that is the slope of that part of the line and all the way up. And if you're above the 64, we're just going to peg it at the top red dot. That's easy.
dot dot
But sorry,
dot kind of a thing. Yeah, you
but
go.
it's just pegged. Yeah, it's just pegged out at
Yeah.
out at the end, right? It's kind of a maximum distance to the right it can be. But what we did to the first quartile, basically, which is from the 0 point to the left of the arrow, you have to allow the 0 point to be 0. And so that's basically what this shows here is that in the first quartile, which is before the gray arrow, the slope of this is steep because if you pick 34,000 as the end of the arrow, if the green dot is 0, that means if you're halfway, you're like at 17,000, it should be in the middle of that. So perceptually, it's almost like it's a logarithmic scale in a sense, in that first quartile, it's a steep slope because it has to make sense. If I say the minimum is 34 and you're at 12, that you're somewhere 12/34 of the way in there, because you won't know what the slope of the rest of it is. So it won't matter to you. But if you're in anything that's in the gray scale, just like his example, it has to fit proportionally between the min and the max. Because where else would you expect 44 to be but in the middle between 34 and 54? And we might as well continue that same scale out beyond it and just peg things afterward. So anyway, so that's what we'll do, which is right.
So
This isn't
visually, you're representing two different logarithmics in the same length, and so
right. Just
so
so
it's
that no
so it's
matter
skewed.
because the customer only has one current existing system, and so we're just how do we make it show up kind of where you would expect it to show up. It turns out we have different formulas to use in the background of where to put the arrow, and so
Okay.
I had to explain that in detail to him, but just so you're aware, right? There actually is, it's not exactly linear. It will look linear to the customer because, if the gray arrow's in the first quartile, they'll see 0 and 34,000, and it'll be appropriately linear in that segment. Ignore the rest, right? And if they're somewhere in the gray bar, it will be appropriate linear for the gray bar and off to the right, because that's all they're going to think about, and that's fine, right? And so they happen to be different, but because each
This
customer
would be
only has
true on
one
the,
existing system, it's
this
fine.
would be true on the high side also.
Yes, well, rather, once, so if 34 to 54 is the gray bar, it turns out the gray bar is half the distance. So that means the top would then be 64. And so if you have an 80,000 BTU system, you'll just be pegged at the red dot, right?
Okay. Okay. So both sides outside of the gray is not necessarily going to be linear.
It will be linear to where you are.
Linear to the likely load range.
Yes.
So the likely load range is going to be a separate. It's going to likely load range is going to take up basically 2/3.
Yeah.
And the size of the increments in between likely load range is going to take up 2/3, but that may be a different increment than the left and the right, and that's okay.
Yeah.
You may have to
correct.
peg. You may have to peg to the left, or you may have to peg to the right, and
Right.
that will not represent. Like if they have a 140,000 BTU furnace on a 70,000 BTU house, well, I can't make the graph big enough.
Right. I'm not going to try.
Because you won't be able to read it.
Right.
So
Yep.
we're just going to say it's out there somewhere. Dot.
Right.
It's sort of here's the graph, and then we put 3 dots, and then we continue the graph, and you recognize that those 3 dots means way the fuck out here.
Right. Yeah, so that would be actually good enhancement. Right now, I just had them peg it at the red dot because that's as far as the image went, but I could have them make it go past it. When we add the red, yellow, green, I'll have them make it go, slightly past it, so it looks like it's beyond the scale.
Okay.
So let me actually make a note in Trello for those 2 enhancements. Anyway, so Jason's feed, I guess I say that only because I'm glad that Jason's doing well, and I want, I love that he's found some enhancements that will help him do his job better, and I want to get those rolled out so that we're responsive to them.
Encouraged. Yes, keep him encouraged, because he's also running into difficulties in his templates and getting them to hold.
There's a wholesale change to that with the drag and drop that's coming. But we got to get them working properly, which is why it's not been rolled out yet. So I don't have Chloe working on fixing the existing ones because he's almost done replacing them.
Okay. He's finding, I think he's ready to go to Comfort Consult. And I would like him to do that all on his own, or as much on his own as possible. And the guidance I'm giving him is to do it for both of his bosses, and to have both of his bosses at both of them, so that they can understand what it's like to go through it as the homeowner, and they can witness someone else going through it as homeowner.
Yeah, actually, that's a good idea. Yeah, he has 2 bosses.
He has 2 bosses.
That's often difficult.
Yes.
Okay.
It's not going to be difficult for him, though, because his boss's revenue per lead was $4,200 this year.
Okay.
So they don't have to be very good at math to understand that they got a golden goose.
Right. Nice.
Yeah. His revenue per lead was 6,200 before he met us. He suspects it's going to be 8.
By the time you roll in the new 17s on the old 6,200s. Okay.
Yeah. This year is going to be a clean year with HVAC 2.0, because he's really got up to speed before January 1st.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's fair to say took a month to get up to speed. He got up to speed in a month. And so this is all helping narrative tremendously.
Yep.
I think we will have a really impressive narrative. I'm not sure how compelling it is with just one case study.
Well, I think you've got a lot. I mean, from everybody else, we know that he's not unique. I'm not sure we have as good data as we have with Jason, but you know from everybody else that's worked through this process, right, that uses the software, that he's not unique, right? He's not a one-off.
So that you're mentioning that has put a lot of my focus is on, we need people to be using the report for obvious reasons, but also because it helps responsibly avoid responsibility. Having either giving the report to the person when you're there, but most importantly is following up the visit and confirming your understanding of what occurred at the visit and asking them to tell you if any of your assumptions are wrong. Right now is the time for you to tell me.
Right.
Sort of locks in the arc of that whole relationship and the understanding of what that relationship encompassed.
Yep.
And I don't know how you do that without completing the report, but maybe you can. In certain cases, I suppose you can. If you close the sale, I think you need to send the report with that email, because that person is now going to be a client, and that follow-up email is going to be crucial later on when they have comfort issues that they decide they do want to solve.
Right.
So
yeah, if you haven't already sent the report, you better at that point, right?
Right, it's a little bit late in the game.
Right, it's better late than never, but
better late than never. But do you even remember?
Better would be earlier, right?
Yeah, like write the email while you remember the visit, because a lot of it's should be in your notes, but a lot of it's not. A lot of it is, this is what our conversation looked like. And this, I'm encouraging people, since Johnny records all of his visits, and that ended up being useful to him because he listens to him after he's like, oh, here's a note, here's a note, here's a note, here's a thing I promised, right? I forgot I promised that. I better make sure to write that down. So yeah, things are going well with Jason. I'd like him to move on to the second tier because he's leaned really hard into Sandler. And I think I changed the Kajabi so that I put the Sandler as an optional piece of the free quote onboarding. Like, if you want to understand what's going to be happening next, here's some Sandler to get a taste of, because next is Sandler. And if you want to level up on free quote, but you don't really think you're going to go do comfort consult, just do this part. Don't even go to the next thing. Right. Here it is. Here's the level up. So hopefully that's good. I'd like more people to go through the onboarding so that I can get feedback of, yes, it does in fact seem to flow the way I'm thinking in my head it does. And of course, because I had to go through and comb it, and all of the writing. Nate did the videos. I did all of the writing. So since it's my writing, I can't read it like an editor.
Objectively, yeah.
And so I need other people to go through it and be like, oh yeah, I found this mistake, or this should be worded differently, or this is out of order, and see that. One of the things that I had kind of subliminally hoped and seems to be occurring, and so I'm leaning into this now, is, I mean, our evolution went from, we believe that everybody should have a blower door test, right? To we believed everybody who wants to have a blower door test should have one. And I think our new evolution, I'd like to ask you about this, if you agree, is we really only want people who need to have blower door tests to have blower door tests.
Right. I think that's true, right? There's a whole bunch of homes which, are fine or whatever, right? Are kind of within expectations. And so unless the customer really wants to do something to drive themselves farther to the left.
They need the education. There are reasons to do blower door tests that
right.
are
So
discover
we
it's
should,
a bad house, but
yeah. So it's not that we don't want to do them, but I think that we only recommend them in certain situations, right?
right. So I've created this and I'm going to post it to general. I don't want to do blower door tests on houses that don't need blower door tests. And that implies a homeowner that's, ambivalent about a blower door test, but not.
Yeah, and similar to this free quote, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So how do we accomplish that? I think with an effective likely load range calculator, HVAC 2.0 free quote process can be performed in a way that eventually you find you're only using your blower door on houses that have significant leakage problems. Here's my rough draft on how that presentation looks. So you think you have a good house? Yes. Then the appropriate size equipment for this house, or houses this size that are good houses, would be in the green range of the likely load range. Well, what happens if I don't have a good house? Well, that discomfort that you're having now, where some rooms are warmer than other rooms? Yes. That still happens. But instead of happening most of the time, it'll probably only happen on the hottest and the coldest days. Oversized equipment can often be uncomfortable most of the time because most of the time it's not experiencing full load, so it short cycles, not distributing the heat gently and evenly. You may even have a furnace going off on high limit, which is dangerous, meaning they're overheating, which shortens the life of the heat exchanger, and you can crack the heat exchanger, which exposes you and your family to carbon monoxide poison. So if you end up being
that last little bit, by the way, is maybe overly dramatic for some customers. Just saying that, right? It's just you will continue to be uncomfortable, and that's why you're uncomfortable, is because it's oversized, so it just doesn't get the heat where it needs to go. Right. And,
right.
And there are other downsides too, but
I embellished because I was practicing on you. I'm glad you caught it. Because it's not in the carbon monoxide thing. But if you end up being undersized because the house is performing in the yellow or the red, we come back and perform a comfort consult. And you get an idea of where the deficiencies are and what might be done to move the house towards green. We're happy to do a comfort consult now if you like, but most people don't want to spend the $1,000. And frankly, we prefer only to do comfort consults on houses we haven't been able to solve comfort issues with great equipment alone.
Right.
So I think that's the narrative. And if we have a really good calculator that does a great job of creating a likely load range, and what we've done by breaking it up into green, yellow, red is we've helped people also have the conversation about red means bad house. This is 90% of houses. It includes the good houses and the bad house.
Yeah, they're not all good.
Red still means bad house. And so if you size over there and you're uncomfortable and you move the house to the left, what we found is a lot of times when people improve houses with oversized equipment, comfort gets worse.
Right.
And so this is a risk that you're taking if you size on the red side of our likely load range.
Right. If you're green, you can do additional work to get your house to line up with green. If you're red, or if you buy red and if you buy green and your house is red, you can move the house to green. If you buy red and your house is green,
you got to buy another pair of more equipment.
You got to replace the equipment, right? So it's
like, the equipment because it's the wrong equipment. And so the idea that you want to play it safe by being in the red is wrong.
Right.
Well, literally wrong. Because you're still going to have heating equipment. You're still going to have cooling equipment, even if it can't get you to your set point on the worst case day. You're still going to be more comfortable than you are now.
Right, 98% of the days. I think the other nice thing, actually, by adding the green, yellow, red, actually what we've done is we said the likely load range is green, yellow, red. Oh, by the way, your current equipment is off the scale red. It's still in our overall line, but it's off the scale red, right? It's beyond what the like what's even likely to be this house. Even if it's a terrible house, it's still that's the wrong size.
And what's interesting about this, or hopefully would be interesting about this, is we may get regular salespeople comfortable allowing homeowners to pick the size of the equipment that sounds crazy to them. Because what happens right now is the guys that have been through Comfort Consult can use this red, yellow, green with no problem, because they've already gone out there and replaced 90,000 BTU equipment with 36,000 BTU heat pumps. And people have been ecstatic. So they know that the equipment is grossly oversized to what the house needs, grossly oversized because manual J is wrong, grossly oversized because people aren't measuring infiltration. They know all of these things. And so what we've done is we've condensed all the knowledge that they already have because of the time in. And so the question is, can we take this likely load range to people who don't know these things? And because we've removed their responsibility for the choice, make them more comfortable putting in these much smaller pieces of equipment and do it without a blower door.
Right.
Because that's the other thing. Our guys are comfortable putting in a 3-ton on a 90,000 replacement because they have a blower door.
Right.
And so if we can remove that, because we've created this really good argument of, well, if the house is a basket case, tighten the house. Use the blower door to find out,
what to do.
Bypass there. Fix that big bypass. The leakage drops 800 and suddenly the house is controllable.
Right. Good.
Okay. So that's where my mind is going as far as this. And I think the likely load range is really crucial, because one of the things, like, everybody in North Carolina is supposed to be doing load calcs.
Right.
The only person in North Carolina doing load calcs is Reedy. Nobody else does load calcs. So if we provide a tool that does load calcs, which it's not a manual J, but it encompasses a more accurate load, and they can go and do exactly what everybody does that does load calc, is they can make the manual J match the equipment they installed, which is what everybody's doing anyway. We at least get them to a point where their manual J is leaning towards small.
Right.
Instead of puffing it so it leans towards big. And the static pressure ends up being kind of the final nail in the coffin, because you can say to the homeowner, well, we did your static pressure, or we didn't do your static pressure. And if you don't dramatically downsize your equipment, that static pressure is still going to be a problem. Or if we don't dramatically downsize your equipment, your risk, because we don't know, of having a static pressure problem is high.
Right.
Because 70% of all equipment out there is running above 0.7.
Yeah.
You know, you don't believe me? Ask the guys at Measure Quick.
Right.
They got thousands and thousands of these static pressure tests. And they're probably a perverse database because those static pressure tests are done by guys that are better than the average guy in the industry, because the average guy in the industry doesn't even know how to take static.
Right. Right. Yeah.
So there's all this. Anyway, that was a long riff. That's sort of where my head is going. That's I think where Jason is also, because that's gonna, when likely load range, like, easy for him to get his head around likely load range, but most of these sales guys don't want to do load calc. And so if we give them a way that gets them
so
to the
let me walk. Yeah, let me walk you through how I do that. So
So my understanding of, like, the old oil guys, they figured out how much oil you would use over a 30-day period. And I don't think the square footage of the house had anything to do with that calculation. So Nate's approach to solving for likely load range probably gets us to the same place. But it felt pretty complicated to me to not be based on anything other than intuition. I'm sure the intuition is good, but I'd rather do it your way. So this is better than Manual J, because we're not guessing at anything.
Right. Yeah.
And if somebody said, but that's not Manual J, we'll say, no, this is what houses actually use.
Right. Yeah. You can use an estimate or you can use actuals.
Yeah. These are actuals.
Right.
And everybody knows that actuals correlate directly to worst case load, which is what you're trying to get to with Manual J.
Right.
With a whole bunch of guesses.
Right.
The oil guy didn't guess. He looked at last year's use across heating degree days and calculated the heating degree days, and bang. That's what he's like, oh, we better get to their house before Tuesday or they're going to be empty.
Right. Right. It's not a hard calculation when you have actuals, right?
It's not a hard calculation when you have actuals. And if we're going to be using a database that has actuals, well, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take the piece of this recording before we start talking about this and make it public.
Okay. Oh, the part about, the narrative. Yeah, that's fine. Yep.
And then this part is just, I mean, if Nate comes and looks, he'll be able to see it, but otherwise it's just you and me, because this is a thing that I think has a boatload of value. I think that this is sort of what, so if Phil Jeffers had survived, he ultimately probably would have arrived at this conclusion. How much more accuracy do you think you're going to get? And one of the things that we know with all these blower doors is you're not going to get more accuracy without getting infiltration, because that's a variable that's all over the fucking place.
Mm-hmm.
So
right. It's actually not the building, right? It's not the how many square feet of window there is or how many square feet of attic. It's like, where are the big holes?
Where are the big holes? The big hole is the big hole in this whole load thing. The big holes are the big hole. The windows are kind of what the windows are, and the attic is what the attic.
Oh, they're triple plane. Okay, that changes.
Oh my gosh, okay, 2000 BTU. But meanwhile, your variance is tonnage. It's 1 to 3 tons of variance. Windows aren't going to change that.
Right.
that level of inaccuracy. That's a huge level of inaccuracy.
Right.
So,
Okay.
fun. Thank you. This is fun.
Yep. Thanks, Ted. See ya.
Yeah.